Welcome to A Space to Speak Your Mind,
a radio programme and a podcast about mental health and well-being.
As part of a radio wellbeing group run by Cornwall Mind,
made by people with lived experience.
We do occasionally cover subjects that some listeners may find distressing.
For more information, help and support, please visit cornwallmind.org.
A Space to Speak Your Mind with Cornwall Mind.
Welcome to the June show.
I'm Tanya.
And I'm Victoria.
And we're your hosts for this month's programme.
On the show,
we'll be joined by Simon from Cornwall Mind to discuss mental health in the workplace.
We'll hear from Olympic bronze medalist Desiree Henry on how she keeps mentally fit ahead of the Paris Olympics this year.
First, though, Kate Shepard-Cohen joins us to talk about PMDD.
A Space to Speak Your Mind.
We are talking to Kate Shepard-Cohen today about PMDD. Kate's going to describe to us some of the symptoms and how it can impact on our mental health. Kate also has lived experiences of PMDD to talk about. So, Kate, would you mind introducing yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the show to talk about this big topic of PMDD, and I say big because the way it's experienced is big and it can hugely impact our lives. I have had first-hand experience of PMDD. I can sit here today and tell you that I don't really have the same experience of it today, and that is because of a practice that I've learned of tracking my cycle and understanding my cycle on a daily basis. Because this practice completely revolutionised my life, and I can sit here, in fact, I am actually day 23 today, so I'm right in the midst of my premenstrual phase. I've got my period next week, and I can sit here in a controlled way and talk to you all. Because of this revolutionary experience, I wanted to share it with everybody, and so I now run an organisation that shares the practice called Menstrual Cycle Awareness, and it's with people who are experiencing extreme symptoms with their menstrual cycle, including PMDD.
Can I just ask, Kate, for our listeners who don't know, what does PMDD stand for?
It's a bit of a mouthful, which is why we call it PMDD. So it's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So this is quite loaded in many different ways. And indeed, of course, when we talk about PMDD, for anyone who already recognises this, knows what it is, it's already loaded because of the experience it gives you. But this idea of dysphoria comes in. This dysphoria is really being very uneasy in yourself and very dissatisfied. I'd say that's an understatement when it comes to PMDD, a sense of unease, because it's a huge disruption sort of physically and emotionally every month for usually the 2 weeks leading up to menstruation. It's called a disorder because this sense of unease, to put it lightly, the dysphoria really impacts everything around you. And this is severe. It can really make you not want to continue living. It's at that end of severity. So that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Thanks, Kate. That's really useful to know more about the meaning of the disorder. I'm just wondering how it does impact on our mental health, and you've touched on that just now, but it would be great to hear a bit more about the detail on how it can impact.
Yeah, I feel that the impact is felt through everything, so particularly in relationship. So relationship with yourself, the feeling of not being good enough and not being able to really exist in the world as it is. That then impacts on relationships, with loving relationships with partners, with children, with friends and family. And that impact is felt because during these really intense 2 weeks of every cycle, so a cycle is roughly 4 weeks, so that's half of every cycle, we can have this feeling of intense depression, irritability, rage, which some people have described as like the world sort of imploding on themselves. And so, of course, that really deeply affects our relationships with others and ourselves. Then that goes on to impact work. It becomes very difficult to almost to function in that time, hence the disordered part of the diagnosis of PMDD, and also why it's now recognised as a disability in the workplace.
You spoke at the beginning about how you have worked on your symptoms by tracking your cycle. For anybody who recognises that they might also have those symptoms, what kind of services is out there for people to get some support?
Yeah, I mean, PMDD has only really become recognised as a thing very recently, since about 2019, really in the last 5 years. And that doesn't necessarily mean that when you go to a doctor will know what PMDD is or know how to recognise it, even in the symptoms you list. And that's worth remembering. We're still in the early days of understanding menstrual health. It's still not that common to be asked, for example, in a doctor's appointment, what day are you in your cycle? And it's usually still quite rare to know where you are in your cycle. That's really why I set out to create my organisation, Menstrual Cycle Support, to create free online program, a course, a very short course, to help to understand how we can track our cycle, what are the different methods we can use. And in doing that, how can we come into a better relationship with our cycle every day, regardless of period problems? The idea behind that was to prepare people to go out and get the support they need and to get it more quickly, because PMDD at the moment is taking on average 12 years to diagnose, 12 years. And I think we should just kind of sit with that for a moment. If you're experiencing these extreme symptoms every month, it takes 12 years to get a diagnosis. You are experiencing an extreme amount of suffering without any support, certainly from the medical system. That's partly due to the lack of understanding of the symptoms being related to your own cycle, or that healthcare professionals recognising that. And it's partly because sometimes these symptoms are showing up underlying mental health issues. Sometimes there can be diagnosis of other mental health issues that are present. So just thinking about answering your question, tracking the cycle is just the number one support that anyone can give themselves. And if that's through an app, or if it's just through good old pen and paper, or if it's simply through doing it in your own mind, what day of the cycle am I? How am I feeling? What can I do to prepare myself for the forthcoming weeks? That in itself is hugely supportive. Finding groups of people who you can share your experience with, other mental health groups. It is considered a mental health challenge, PMDD. Again, a challenge is to put it lightly. So finding other people that you can speak to is really helpful too.
Kate, do you think that nutrition plays a part in managing symptoms? Have you had any experience of any nutritional elements that you have used to help you cope with PMDD?
I think it's like most health concerns, we can begin to address them first and foremost by identifying that they're there, really, naming them, and then starting to look at lifestyle, diet, sleep, exercise. That said, we know, don't we, anyone who's experienced deep depression, those things are very hard to access, those changes, which is why I come back again to just knowing where you are in your menstrual cycle every day and trying to plan life as much as possible, get the support that is needed as much as possible. Once we're on that step, regardless of whether you have PMDD, actually anyone with a menstrual cycle really is recommended to be doing this. You can start to make changes, and then you notice the difference. You really start to see what you've done and what the impact has been. I think otherwise, when we think about diet, when we're in a place of darkness, which PMDD certainly is, that it is a place of darkness, certainly for the 2 weeks of the month, it's quite hard to think about big changes in diet. So I'd say track number one, and then start to see what's happening and what are the days that it's happening on, and start making changes, very small changes based on that. So if day 16 of your cycle, for example, this is what I had, I still have actually, day 16 is sort of mid-cycle. I have a big drop in my mood. To be honest, I just want to sort of run for the hills, I always say, which is hard when you've got 3 small children. So I didn't feel like I belonged in my life, and I just wanted to leave everything. But because I knew I couldn't, because of the responsibilities I had to my children and family, I felt like I was kind of worthless. Now, I was having this, and once I started tracking that experience, day 16 was a real drop point. I was able just to sort of be with it each month. Oh, okay, hang on, this is just day 16. This is day 16. This is day 16. Just sort of stay with it. And somehow that really helped me to just be in the feeling I had. And little by little, that just seemed to ease that experience of day 16. So now, as I say, I still have it. It's so much smaller than it was, that feeling of just not being able to cope with it all. It's just coming in, letting everybody know around me as well, I'm day 16 today, that's a difficult day for me, has been enormously helpful.
In terms of letting people around you know, was that difficult initially? Because there is a stigma around periods and talking about periods, and I think everybody is familiar with PMS, and there's often quite a few jokes that go hand in hand with, ooh, they're PMSing or whatever. But in terms of actually communicating, I have this difficulty because of my biology, maybe in the workplace or around other people that don't menstruate biologically. How can you feel confident to do that?
I do find that in myself, giving each day of the menstrual cycle a name, like day 16, day 1, day 9, having those days, somehow it neutralises it slightly. A lot of the shame is related around that menstruating part of the menstrual cycle. Once you sort of embrace every day of it, seeing that there are good sides to it as well, and that is related to the menstrual cycle, so that really enjoying the good days, really kind of staying with those days that are harder, I think it tends to neutralise the feeling. But you're right that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of just general menstrual literacy, particularly in the workplace, of being able to say to someone, actually, I'm day 25 today and this is difficult for me, and them know what that means. I think we've still got a little way to go for that. But as I say, PMDD, because of its chronic nature, it is classed as a disability. So I would recommend, for example, if somebody is experiencing these severe symptoms but not sure how to talk about it, to use the terminology that we have. Well, actually it is classed as a disability, and you can just Google this, and then when you take that into your line manager, it's quite hard to argue, because we're talking then about discrimination in the workplace, and frankly that's what we do need to address. This is a thing, and actually that's how somebody described it to me, and exactly to your point, Victoria. When I first discovered that I had PMDD, or it had a label to it that it was PMDD, I explained to a very close friend of mine that it was called PMDD, and she said, oh, that's the thing now, is it? As though it was undervalued somehow, or undermined, or that I had made it up. And this is not true, and it has been identified as a very, very real mood disorder disability, that we have to take the strength and own it and remove the shame from ourselves in having it, because that's what will change it for others coming behind us and anyone else with PMDD. And it does affect 1 in 20 women in the UK. So for every person with PMDD that speaks up in their workplace, they're helping another person elsewhere. I think that's very comforting and gives us strength as we make these changes in society.
Absolutely, yeah. Being an agent for change for others is a nice way to think about it. In terms of what we could do if we experience these cyclical symptoms that affect our mood, should we be going to our doctors and talking to them about it? You spoke earlier about how it's still relatively new as a diagnosis, so is there anything that we can be doing to encourage further research into it?
I think it's really important for us, as with a lot of mental health, and actually a lot of different ways of describing health concerns in our current sort of medical system. For me, I really felt a burning sort of sense of injustice that I'd been labelled with a disorder, that I felt actually for me it was the rest of the world that was disordered. It was the way that my working day, the demands and expectations on me throughout my cycle to be delivering without ever taking a pause. It wasn't enabling me to live my best life, and it wasn't necessarily a disorder from within me, but actually it was just the structure of the rest of my life that was disordered. And coming to terms with this, and although the diagnosis was useful, PMDD, what it did actually was a springboard to say, well, hang on, what is going on here in the rest of my life? What can I do? And one of the first things to do for anybody who's experiencing extreme symptoms, we spoke a little bit there about, well, how can we start making changes to lifestyle and diet, and I mentioned tracking. But the other thing is just taking as much time as we possibly can during menstruation itself, because that is a perfect opportunity just to really take some deep resting time. I've got 3 children, I've got a job. We've got to be realistic about it, but it is possible to move more slowly in that time, ask for more support as much as possible, or just say no to things. And I've really begun to do that, and I found the power of no in that time, which seems strange, and we often talk about that with other women that I help with this. It seems strange when you're suffering premenstrually to focus more on menstruation, but actually what happens is when we take that rest during menstruation, the symptoms when we come back round our cycle do get easier. They just do, because we are more rested and resilient to face them. And what happens when we're more rested and resilient to face the premenstrual phase is that these traumas that are surfacing, and that's really what is also happening, and increasing research to show the link now between trauma and PMDD, we're able to see these traumas for what they are and just be with them, and they don't take a grip and turn into rage that explodes on the rest of our life. Actually just sit, and then the menstrual cycle becomes a very powerful healing tool, and I really believe that. And so this is from going from a place of being disordered, which is very negative in itself, and it means that we are ill and we need fixing, to being a place of power that actually our cycle is showing us something. It's shouting at us, in fact, to look at ourselves and come into a different relationship with ourselves. And that just begins, one, with tracking the cycle every day, and just having a quick cycle check-in of knowing how you're feeling each day. And the second thing is, it's just taking as much time as possible during menstruation. In answer to your question, Victoria, directly about going to see the doctor, as I say, your doctor may not know about PMDD. There's lots of different ways you can chart your cycle. My course is on menstrualcyclesupport.com. It's free and it takes an hour online. You can keep coming back to it any time you want, and it just helps you to chart your cycle on a daily basis, and then take those charts to your doctor, and that will help you get the medical support that you need. And that's, of course, that's notwithstanding the fact that if you are really struggling, don't hesitate. Go and see your doctor and suggest to them you think you might have PMDD.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the tracking, because I speak from lived experience with it as well. And I've been tracking for most of my menstruating life. And like you say, just learning to be and to notice the changes and to sort of almost not beat yourself up about it. And I really notice the good days as well now, which I didn't used to, but I can tell by what day it is, and I think, and I feel really creative, really joyous, and I really try and embrace that, so that it's not, like you say, focusing on the really difficult days.
That's exactly my experience too. And I also found that I use this practice, menstrual cycle awareness, and that was created by Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer at Red School. And they have free courses available. They've got an amazing resource there. They were the first to compare the phases of the menstrual cycle, 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, as being comparable to the seasons of the year. And I found that immensely useful in my healing journey, to think of menstruation as the inner winter of my cycle. So again, that kind of hibernation and rest, there's permission for it. The spring and summer energies of, the first and second week absolutely met how I was experiencing my cycle, just coming out into full energy. And then coming around now to this inner autumn, this premenstrual phase. And that's just been a huge shift in my perception of the premenstruum, in that when we think about the outer autumn as a season, sure, we think about the leaves falling off the tree, and there's also the harvest, there's the beautiful colours of that season. And it is possible to experience that. I never thought I'd be able to say that, but I'm sitting here on day 23 and saying that they are there. What has been required for me is recognising that inner autumn. There's a slowing down, there's a winding down towards the inner winter of menstruation. And in winding down and trying to alleviate as much stress as is possible, it means that I'm able to hold the tension of the feelings that I'm having, which are still painful. I'm not going to lie. I still am sitting here feeling very close to the traumas that I've had in my life because of being in day 23, but I'm just tender with them. So I found that extremely useful, the use of the inner seasons.
I love the imagery of the cycle as seasons, and I think, like you say, Kate, that really helps with thinking of, I'm coming into my autumn winter, and now is the time to rest, now is the time to hibernate, ready for the energy of my spring. I think that's a really lovely visualization. And I think what you say about journaling and finding a new relationship with yourself is really useful for any mental health need that you might have. So looking at how that's connected to your cycle and noting down different points and how that helps you understand it more is really significant.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm 37, and at school the workshops that we had around periods and menstruation was all focused on when you bleed. There wasn't any other information about the journey that you will go on emotionally with your cycle. I mean, there probably was some reference to feeling a bit grumpy before you menstruate, but that's really it's really the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? So it would be great for younger generations to start understanding their cycle more as soon as they hit puberty, because you're then more prepared for the real ups and downs and for something as difficult as PMDD. Because I think for me, it's just not knowing at all that anything's connected. I only realised changes in emotions from tracking my cycle as well. And if I'd never done that, I just would never have had an understanding, and there'd always be a frustration there. I mean, there's still a frustration there, but at least there's understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the difficulty of bringing this up perhaps in the workplace and the shame that's still surrounding menstruation. And I really hope that that is shifting a little bit, but it still exists. We're talking about 1,000 years of taboo. And the very fact that we can have this conversation and it being aired on the radio is phenomenal, really. But society has not been designed in a way that respects cyclicity. So this idea that we're kind of almost being pushed to be in a spring-summer phase of our life even, and perhaps that's why later on in life, post-menopause, there's a feeling of not being respected or valued as much. You know, we're in this sort of spring-summer energy. But the reality is that leads to burnout. It's not sustainable, and we're actually seeing that play out in an industrialised world that is pushing for constant output and progress. And I think we're seeing that in our inner worlds too. The cycle is there. It's naturally regenerative. It renews itself. But I found with PMDD that if I was just pushing myself all the time just to be the same. It was almost surprising me when I had my period come, you know. Whereas now this idea that actually no, there's like a kind of rise in energy, and then just like a gentle fall in energy too, and then this rest time. But I've got to say, it's a lovelier way of living. I'm actually really grateful for the PMDD for waking me up to that, really shaking me to wake me up to it. Although I also appreciate for anyone that is in the midst of it, it's quite hard to feel any sense of gratitude. But there is hope to move beyond it. It's a label. It doesn't have to stay with us. It doesn't describe us fully. We're more than that. And perhaps it's an awakening to our power.
And interestingly, thinking about PMDD and moving into perimenopause and menopause, that's another journey in itself, because obviously then the cycle is more erratic and the symptoms along with it can be more erratic. So I think that needs help and support and talking about as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the more work we can do leading up to menopause, I think particularly if PMDD, you know, if these extreme symptoms are there, even by listening to this podcast is like on the right journey of trying to understand it, because it will help so much with that menopause experience where perhaps we fall into like a longer inner autumn, so a longer premenstrual phase. But remember, there is beauty in there and there is the harvest. I'm a believer of this. I mean, perhaps I'm being idealistic. I'm 43, so I'm in perimenopause. I feel my cycle shifting, but I've not gone through menopause yet, so I can't speak to that. But my sincere hope is that it's possible, and it's possible to do it in a way that is conscious and we can hold it without disrupting our lives too much.
Yeah, I think so. You can still do tracking, but it's not as predictable, I suppose. So my day 23 might actually be day 48. It's kind of, it gets a little bit haywire, but I certainly still use that practice of counting and awareness of the feeling in my body and in my mind.
And that's it. And because you have the practice, after a while the days almost become, anyway I find this, become irrelevant, because I'm just sort of used to feeling into where I'm at in myself, but I have heard that and worked with many women and others who menstruate, who have gone through the menopause journey, that they've begun to use the lunar cycle. And I think this is really fascinating in itself. So using the new moon as that inner winter, and then of course that full moon almost as the ovulation part of the cycle, as the inner summer. What that does is it's an invitation. I mean, we could use the moon, we don't have to use the moon, we could just use at any point in a monthly cycle. But what it does is it enables and invites that deep rest that might not necessarily be related to menstruation, but it's the resting bit that is key. It's taking time just to go just a bit slower.
If people would like to contact you about your organisation, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, so my organisation is called menstrualcyclesupport.com, and we offer this online free course in menstrual cycle awareness, so some of the bits that we've spoken about today. Anybody can access it at any time. There's one for teens as well, so from age 13 upwards, and there's a separate course then for adults. It's also available on social prescribing, and in fact that's how we've begun to innovate mainstream menstrual health care, because I really felt that it was unacceptable. I think I've sort of redirected some of my premenstrual rage into this idea that this is totally unacceptable, that healthcare professionals don't ask you where you are in your cycle, and it's equally really not fair as menstruators or as women that we don't have access to this information ourselves. And so that's why we created this course. I wanted to make it free so that it was accessible for everybody, and we launched it initially through St Austell Healthcare, and we put it online because of COVID. Initially, it was just going to be in the town hall, but of course, as soon as it went online, I was actually inundated with requests to be part of the course. And I wanted to do it properly. I wanted to change the system. So I contacted all of the GP surgeries across Cornwall and got it on social prescription across the entire county. It's now in over 500 GP surgeries across the whole of the UK. So we launched our teens course just in March in Parliament with the Women's Health Ambassador giving the keynote address and saying how crucial it is. So it's quite interesting where this idea of almost something a bit radical about using the inner seasons and tracking our cycle as a way that's been endorsed by the mainstream healthcare system. But I'm based in Cornwall and this course is available. You don't have to go to the doctor to get it. You can sign up yourself anytime, but it's also there if you ask your GP surgery. They'll direct you to. I also wanted to mention a friend of mine, Victoria Dufour. She runs an organisation called Nature and Me, and she's offering an in-person workshop about menstrual cycle awareness if you prefer the in-person touch. She's doing a workshop in Falmouth in June, so that's also available.
Thanks so much, Kate. Thank you for your insight and sharing your personal experience of PMDD. It's been very eye-opening for sure.
Now let's hear from Olympic bronze medalist Desiree Henry on how she's keeping mentally fit ahead of the Paris Olympics this year with Richard.
A space to speak your mind.
Team GB athlete Desiree Henry is aiming for gold at the Paris Olympics, and with just 2 months until the Games get underway, she's talking about her golden moments and urging us to find ours. From training at the same time every day, Desiree puts much of her own success down to the smallest daily rituals and getting in the right frame of mind, which she believes is key to achieving her goals. Now Desiree is offering her insights into how we can all reclaim our focus, energy and drive to find our golden moments after overcoming severe injuries, loss of funding and missing out on the Tokyo Games, to come back stronger mentally and physically, and now is on course to represent Team GB once again on the biggest stage. And she joins me now, so thank you for being here, Desiree.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. How's it going?
Really well. So we're talking about our mental state when it comes to key moments in our life. I'm wondering, how important is mental health to you in sport and in life generally?
You know what? Mental health, I feel like, is everything to me. It's the thing that allows me to get out of bed and actually go towards going to my training sessions and really giving it everything that I've got. And I think it's just important as an athlete just to make sure that I'm really taking care of myself as an individual, as a person, not necessarily myself as an athlete. And I think by doing that, it's just allowed me to unlock major and different kind of things within myself as an athlete.
So what can we do to keep ourselves mentally strong, and how do we recognise when we might not be quite where we want to be?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because the Solgar research found that literally half the population believe that their mental state holds them back from reaching their goals due to feeling overstimulated or fatigued. And it's just like, it's such a sad statistic in a way, because of course that means that people aren't achieving their goals and dreams. And if I was in that position of having the goal or dream to be an Olympian and being overstimulated, I could only imagine what it's like for other people to have different goals that they feel as though that they can't achieve, even if it means, you know, taking care of loved ones, being with friends and family. And I think just by being able to take a step back and possibly spend time with friends and family, that may actually help them to look after their mental state.
Yeah, it is. It's really just recognising amongst ourselves, amongst our friends and family, as you say, our work colleagues, and also just when people might be changing just how they are. We just have to recognise those signs, don't we?
That's the most important thing, recognising the signs and even recognising how you feel as an individual. If you feel as though it's been 3-4 days and you're still feeling exhausted, that may be early signs of burnout. Therefore, it's just really trying to take the time to figure out, well, how do I recover, essentially, even if it means once you get home, it's like not spending potentially as much time on your phone, or just being able to try to go to bed earlier, or to be able to just have some meditation time. Because I think even for me, being able to meditate in the evenings just really allows me to kind of calm and realign my thoughts and my feelings and just essentially calm me down, just so that I can ultimately get a good night's sleep also.
As this time of year, people may have exams, they may be changing jobs or taking a bit of a summer break. And for you, you know, a big thing coming up with the Paris Olympics. How do you take that time and not focus on the one things? And when do you know that that's going to happen? So do you have to have that in the back of your mind?
Yes. Yeah. No. I've definitely got it in the back of my mind. So my qualifications are actually coming up the end of June. And that's like the real deciding time as to when I'll know if I'll actually make the team or not, based on actually how I perform at the championships. And I think between then and now, for me, it's just being able to control what I can control. And I think that's even for others, whether they are taking exams, etc. It's just knowing that how prepared can I be for this big event that's coming up. So for me, it would be training, making sure that I'm not just turning up to training. Being present is one thing, but I obviously have to put in a lot of hard work. And it's really talking to myself and saying, make sure that you are putting in 100% and you're not just giving 5% all the time. And I think if you are getting ready for an exam or anything like that, it's just like reading the study material, practicing. You know, I feel like there's mock tests. I used to take exams too, doing multiple mock tests just to allow you to feel confident. So then when that big day does come, you know, you feel, or you're ultimately confident and ready for whatever's about to be thrown at you, just knowing that you took time to prepare ultimately.
And we all have setbacks in our lives sometimes, and sometimes that's the learning curve. That's the thing that gets us to the next level. So how have you kept so mentally strong after missing out at Tokyo? Yeah,
I feel like having so many setbacks in my life in a way has, if anything, made me a more resilient person than ever. And I think it's just, I'm in a space right now that because I've been able to overcome the disappointment of Tokyo, actually having injuries, etc., now that I'm on the other side where I'm in a position to potentially make my second team, I no longer have injuries, etc., I'm just feeling more confident. And I think I wouldn't feel as confident as I am now if I hadn't gone through those adversities. So I sometimes think it's all about using your negative experiences to your advantage to make you feel more confident and better as an individual.
I think for some of us, we want a distraction from what we're doing sometimes. So we look to maybe being creative, maybe using some of our other skills. It could be being outside, but obviously you get that opportunity quite a lot. And for some of us, doing exercise. But again, that's your career. So for you, getting a puppy was a big thing for you as emotional support. Can you explain how that came about and what difference it's made?
Yeah, oh my goodness, my little puppy, his name is Henry. He's like 6 years old, a little sausage dog, or 5. But I had him after I had my first surgery. And I think for me, that was just a very hard moment in my life because I'd had smaller injuries before in my career, but I had never had anything that led towards me having actual surgery, which meant kind of starting from the beginning. And I think whilst I was having this surgery, this all took place in the Netherlands because that used to be my old training base. I was obviously away from my friends, my family. All I had is kind of like my training partners around. And even then at that stage of early rehab, I couldn't do what they could do. My training sessions were significantly shorter because there's only X amount of hours that you can do for rehab. And so that's why I decided to get a puppy, just to kind of bring me a little bit of joy. Honestly, at the end of the days after my rehab, it was just really nice to come back to this excited puppy that has no idea who you are, what you do. They're just happy to see you, happy to play with you. And I think for me, it was just a great distraction. And thankfully, my little dog Henry, he's been able to come with me to different places. So not only was he with me in the Netherlands, because he is a Dutch Dutch dog, but he's been able to fly over here with me to the UK. And even when I was away in the US, he came out there with me in Florida. So if anything, he's just continuing to provide that same kind of just joy and peace and just a positive distraction, because I'm sure many of us look at pets and dogs and whoever, and we're just like, oh my goodness, they're just so adorable and cute. I find myself just taking pictures of him when he's sleeping, and that's a better pastime than over fixating on my training or whatever is kind of going on in the sporting life. And I think now just being able to have that balance of, okay, I go to training and work hard, and now I come home and I get to relax, recover and look after my dog. It's just the way that my life is kind of balanced out in a positive way, just to allow me to be happy on and off the track.
Yeah, and getting to see the world. I mean, what a great life. What advice do you have for people to get on track with their individual goals, especially for young girls who maybe want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I would say, especially for young girls, it's important to try and speak to other young girls and see if they have similar interests. Even in regards to sport, you may have a couple of friends, I know that I did, that weren't necessarily interested in sport, but it was more so a social time for us to kind of have fun. And I think especially young girls, I always emphasize the level of enjoyment early on. Your early years, or those are the years that you're meant to enjoy, have fun, let it be not a chore, but something that you look forward to because it brings you joy. And then later on, let it be serious. So I guess I would always encourage people to bring a friend, bring a family member, let someone come with you on this journey. Again, just for the company aspect. And even if you don't have anyone available, I would just say even look at different YouTube videos online as to whatever your craft is, whether it's being an athlete. There you can look at different training techniques or different styles and see if you want to experiment with them when you get down to the track or something like that. I always like to try and make things as fun as possible, especially at such a young age, because we know as adults things get harder and more intense, and it's just no, I'm sure we'd all wish we could go back and really enjoy these early years.
And where can we find out more?
Where people can find information just in regards to their mental health, different ways to support themselves. The solgar.co.uk website really provides some amazing information about that, and also what different supplements and vitamins people can take just in order to help them in their everyday well-being. So many of us are deficient in so many different things, but from them in comparison to having to shop around, etc. As a Solgar user for the last, over 10 years now.
So if people want more information, they can go there. But for now, Desiree Henry, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Desiree.
Time to welcome Simon from Cornwall Mind to discuss mental health in the workplace with Victoria.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
We have Simon here from Cornwall Mind talking about mental health in the workplace. Simon, we're really interested to know a bit more about your roles within Cornwall Mind and the other organisations that you work for.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. CSI, in my role for Cornwall Mind, is mostly around how we fund some of the projects we do and how we resource them. The more interesting parts about that, other than just getting money in, is enabling other people to understand what we do and why when we seek to fund a thing, which is a bit more interesting. But I also work for another charity called Connect Communities, where I do some peer mentoring and support people who are peer mentors and do some kind of stuff around how we resolve conflicts and that kind of thing. And then I lead a project called Compassionate Kerno, which is around how we can create more compassionate communities, how we bring communities together, we give people a voice that maybe feel as though they're not valued. And all of those things come together really to think about how we, in every aspect of our lives and our communities, how we improve our mental well-being together and everybody having something to contribute.
That's a really nice thought, thinking about mental health as a community rather than just one person's responsibility. It's a really nice vision. I am really interested in how you got involved in the topic of mental health in the workplace.
Yeah, so I'd worked in mental health for quite a while, and then somebody I knew in a large factory in the Midlands came to me and said that one of his colleagues, he was the manager of, was having a really difficult time. I think a member of her family had been given a really difficult diagnosis, and he wanted to support her, but he didn't really know where to start, didn't know what to do. and asked me if I would help, and we went in and we worked with him and some of his staff, and actually just by giving people some confidence to listen, helping them to understand what their colleagues might be experiencing and why, and breaking down some of the barriers and fears they have about engaging with our friends and our colleagues and listening to them, and not being scared that you're going to have to be a counsellor or something, just to contribute to how somebody might be that day and just help them through it. So yeah, it was really interesting, and then it got me thinking then about what that looks like in the workplace and maybe what the implications are for that in other places.
Nice. I think mental health in the workplace is a really crucial topic, and obviously has been for a long time, but the more that we are aware and talking about mental health in general, the more important it is for organisations to really consider that and put that at the forefront when they're working with people, when they're employing people, understanding each person's needs and hoping to meet that. So how do we go about looking at the positives in the workplace?
So I think sometimes it's too easy just to see the negatives and think about, oh, here's a problem to be fixed, rather than here is Simon or is Victoria, and thinking, how do I enable them to be the best version of Simon and Victoria they can be, and how can I promote what's positive and what's good with them, rather than identifying what's wrong with you and thinking how you need to fix that. I think it just changes the conversation there quite easily.
I suppose when you start a new job, something to think about is being aware of the red flags that could be a trigger for you. So do you have any advice on what to look for in terms of that?
Yeah, and I think sometimes that can be the most simplest things. If you go to work and you start a new job, and on your first day you've got nowhere to put your coat and your bag, and you've took your lunch and nobody shows you where to put your lunch or where the coffee machine is or anything like that, that might not put you into a massive crisis, but it's uncomfortable from day one, and you possibly don't feel as though you've been cared for in how you want to. But then more than that, there's the language we use, and we think about language in all aspects of our life, but in the workplace I think it's really important to think about how the words we use and how we present certain opinions and things might affect those around us. And that might not be very serious language around racism or something around kind of gender or anything like that. It could be much more low-key than that. But still thinking about how things might affect others around us, I think, is important as well.
Yeah, those initial introductions between people, and especially in the workplace, because you've gone through the process of applying, having the interview, getting the job, which is a brilliant feeling, and then it's likely that you'll have a bit of anxiety about fear of the unknown for your first day. So employers can do a lot to make it really comfortable.
So I used to think, Victoria, that in other aspects of our life, if we'd invited somebody round to our house for the first time, or we'd said we'll go meet in this restaurant or something for the first time, we would make sure that people felt comfortable and they knew what to expect and stuff. So I used to, when I was a manager, on people's first day, I used to meet them at the door to the building, not make them find their way through a massive building to the office where they'd got to come to. I used to try and meet them, or have somebody meet them at the door just to say, hi, welcome, it's your first day, let me show you where to go. It was a small thing, but made such a difference to how people felt as soon as they walked in.
Simon, it would be great to hear a little bit about your personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no different to anybody else and not immune to life's challenges. I started a new job many years ago now. In the course of doing that, I left the job that I'd been in and felt secure in for many years. I moved house and moved the town that I lived in at the same time. Me and my wife had a relatively new baby. At that stage, she was only 7 or 8 months old. And all of that change for me just affected me really, really negatively. And I had a bit of a downward spiral of anxiety and depression and fears and that. And it was a really tough time for me. But actually, the person whose role it was to support me and manage me and supervise me, she was fantastic. Her name was Christina, and she looked after me. She spent time checking in on me. She didn't make me feel as though I shouldn't be there or I didn't have anything to contribute still. And she made sure that I'd got the help that I needed, and they paid for it. It was a really good experience in that sense of a difficult time, but actually where I was still unable to do my job and have the support that I needed.
That's really important, and it's amazing that Christina had those skills and that human connection to really be there for you, and also make sure that you were treated fairly in the workplace and given the support that you needed to do your job. And what an amazing experience for you to have to then go on and give that back to others. As somebody with mental health needs, it can often feel quite difficult to disclose them when you're starting a job. Maybe there isn't already a process in which there's a form that you fill out to explain those. What is the best way to disclose what you need to your boss or line manager?
So I think there's a couple of things there that we could do. And we tend to always have the opportunity these days at the end of the interview where they'll say to us, do you have any questions? So it might be that without disclosing something very personal about yourself, that you can say in the interview, what's your company's policy on supporting people with a particular thing? And you don't have to be very specific, but how would the company support somebody? What policies do you have in place? That kind of thing, that maybe draws that out in the end of the interview in that way. So you've got to weigh in, and being aware, without looking like you're a really militant worker, be aware of what the policies the company has got in place. Who do they suggest you talk to when things are in difficulty? And it may be by asking that question at the end of an interview, if they haven't got the right things in place, they might just be prompted to think maybe they should have, especially if you were a person that they think they want to have in that role. They might be thinking, actually, he or she brings that to us and it's an important thing we need to think about. So there's a couple of things that might be helpful. That's
a really strategic approach, because I'm really passionate about gaining as much information from the company in an interview and not just thinking that it's all one-sided. So it's a really smart way to explore how seriously they're taking those things, and then you can go away and think a bit more about whether it's the right place for you.
I did it in an interview once and I said, what's your policy on X? And they were really honest and said, we don't have one. And they said to me, if you were appointed, would you actually help us think about what that might look like? Not everybody's going to respond in that way, but they were really good about that. The other thing I ask sometimes in an interview to people is, I'm not perfect and your company won't be perfect. Where do you think you need to improve? Again, in my experience, people have tended to be quite honest about that. It all depends how you phrase it, obviously. But there are ways of bringing things out rather than just saying directly, I suffer from X or Y, which might not be helpful, but
that honesty is really refreshing and encouraging as well, isn't it, from an organisation that you're considering to work at. I suppose if you're in a situation where you might have disclosed formally what needs you need, and following that it might not be taken seriously, it might be forgotten about, what can you do at that point?
That's difficult. I think first thing just to acknowledge, without giving the answer, is that actually just to acknowledge that that's really tough and it's difficult, and not to fail to recognise that, because that can be a really difficult place to be, especially if you're in a relatively small team and you feel quite isolated. So I think it's worth just recognising that. Having said that, hopefully there is somebody within the organisation that you have been able to recognise is a good person to talk to, somebody you can trust, and somebody who's just been kind to you. It may not even be somebody who's in a management role, but somebody you can just kind of say, I'm feeling difficult about this, and they might just support you in going and having a conversation. Hopefully you're able to identify the person in that organisation whose role it is to actually help you, who's meant to do that, and go to them. Some people now in big organisations have people called things like, freedom to speak up guardians and stuff like that. Different people call them different names now. I think people are trying to move away from the phrase whistleblower because it's got negative connotations of its own. But try and find out where that can be, and hopefully there's a person within there somewhere that you can talk to positively. Failing that, it may be that you need to find someone initially outside that you just have that conversation with and helps you with confidence. That might be a GP, just to go, actually this I'm feeling at work, and they might be able to suggest where to go to. Or there are some really good organisations around, Mind being one of them. Man Down, for example, Men in Sheds, and there's some women's ones as well. And it doesn't matter how old you are or whatever. And it may be that you just go to find somebody who helps you think about how you can have that conversation. And that will look differently, obviously, depending on where you live and work.
So often in the workplace, we can find ourselves in a bit of negativity. Quite often people might be talking about each other. We all sometimes have a moan. It's just what we do as humans. But if you were privy to someone talking about you in a derogatory way on the basis of your mental health, you might have seen it by accident in an email or overheard someone talking in the office when you're on your way back in. What are the next steps? Because that's obviously really going to affect you. And is there anything that you should do in terms of legally documenting your experiences? Have you got any advice for those kind of really tricky situations?
So obviously we've moved on here now from just a casual remark that might have been out of place or something to a more serious situation. And in this case then, there should be policies in place for how you can deal with that. But it's always a good idea just to write it down and to log it, because actually if it's made you feel upset or whatever, sometime down the line when somebody asks you what happened, you may not be able to remember properly, or you may not be able to articulate it in the way that you'd quite like to. So it's always good just to write that stuff down. You may not need to ever refer back to it, but it's a useful thing to do. And I would say this is easier said than done, but don't let it crush you immediately, because actually you've already been affected by it, especially if somebody's done it on purpose, which hopefully they didn't, but they might have. You don't want to kind of let that ruin who you are and potentially ruin what positive work relationships there might be down the road. So I think it's important that you protect yourself in that without letting somebody off the hook. Hopefully, as I said, the policies and stuff that are in place then give you the vehicle to deal with it in a positive way. That should be enough. And actually, you should then be able to deal with it using the processes that are in place within your organisation. If that fails, and if it is serious and the company you work for or whatever is actually doing nothing and the behaviour of someone or a group of people is really that serious, then you probably need to speak to someone else, and then I would suggest then maybe going to citizens advice or something like that, or to Mind. And again, wherever you're comfortable actually, because I think you're already in a difficult situation. It's your workplace where you're meant to feel safe and secure. So I think one of the most important things is you deal with it with people with whom you are safe and secure, and not into another place where you've got to build up the courage to go and talk to somebody. So I would start with a person where you actually feel confident in will hold you in that situation, and then help you work through what that might feel like.
Sounds great. Great advice, Simon. When you're applying for a role and on the application form, it gives you the opportunity to disclose your mental health. If you do that, what legally does the organisation then have to do to support you through the recruitment process?
So I think the first thing for that is that any question that an employer asks in a recruitment process, there has to be a good reason and an appropriate reason why they're asking that question. So, for example, once I was advertising a job and I asked somebody if they had a driving licence, and I was told I couldn't do that. And what I should have done was, are you able to provide yourself with transport to deliver an on-call thing? Not, have you got a driving licence? That's a silly example. But there needs to be a good reason why somebody might be asking that in the first place, not just because they're interested or whatever. And it's like all of that stuff that now you have, usually at the back end of an application, isn't it, now, with the equality and diversity questionnaires here about stuff. So there needs to be a good reason for it, and they then need to deal with your data, your personal information in an appropriate way. And they can't, if they've had a good reason to ask it, then they can only deal with that information within the reason why they need it to ask it. So there might be a very good reason why you can't do a certain job if you've got a certain condition or limitation or whatever it might be, but it can't be just because they don't fancy having somebody in their workplace that might have suffered from mental ill health in the past. My suggestion would be, and I do this myself again, is where I think there's stuff that I should probably disclose about my health or something, I tend to wait until I've been shortlisted, because I think that's a more positive thing. And I always think if you're going to have that conversation, a bit like me and you are now, if I can look you in the eye, Victoria, and say, actually I've had these experiences in the past, they don't affect me now, this is how I deal with it, what support would you be able to give me in the workplace? I think that comes over in a completely different way to ticking a box on an application form that just says, I've had mental health issues in the past. And so unless there's good reason for them to be asking it because it's relevant to the process, I wouldn't disclose that until you're shortlisted, would be my advice.
I'm really interested in how work culture has changed. You've been working with this focus for a long time.
I was made to think about it specifically. I did something that we call a story circle, and I was doing it with a group of mostly older people, not all of them. Some of them were retired, some not. But some of the people in there talked about the beginning of their working life and the very natural, not policies, not processes or procedures, just the fact that it was a natural thing that everybody supported one another and you always knew that you would be supported and cared for and looked after. And they said it was a real shame that towards the end of their working life they recognised that that wasn't the case anymore. And I wonder what it is about our society or about the way we set up employment and stuff that has caused that to change. And I don't think there's one definitive answer, but I think it's something that's worth exploring and thinking about how we enable a positive culture in our workplace. And maybe we need to give staff permission more to care for one another and to do that and to think about that, and maybe that actually having a small time without it being kind of everybody's revealing everything about their dirty washing every day, but where there is a proper opportunity and a safe space for people to be able to talk about it. There are lots of different things you can do. What I would say is the most important thing I would say about this is that the people in that particular workplace are the ones that own that story, and they're the ones that should set the culture, not somebody from the outside or the manager, because they're the ones who live that experience, and it's for them to have the power to decide that, not somebody to impose it.
Thank you so much for your time, Simon, and all of your incredible insight into mental health in the workplace. You've given us some really great things to focus on, to be aware of, and to feel strong about.
No, thank you, because I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much.
That's all for this month's show.
Thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us for the July show.
If you've missed anything on today's show, you can download the podcast right now on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon podcasts.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear the new episode when it comes out, or listen back to any of our previous programmes.
For support and more information for better mental health, visit cornwallmind.org
or call the Mind helpline during office hours
on 0300 123 3393.
There is a 24/7 NHS local urgent mental health response phone line.
It's free to access by anyone at any age
on 0800 038 5300.
And don't forget, you can also call the Samaritans anytime for free
on 116 123.
If you'd like to be part of the show, you can get in contact. Just email aspacetospeakyourmind@gmail.com.
And you can also find out more about the show if you follow Cornwall Mind on Facebook or Instagram, or on their website cornwallmind.org.